That's right. You're listening to another episode of the Co-Main Event Mixed Martial Arts Podcast. I'm Chad Dundas. That's Ben Folks. We're both longtime MMA journalists, and for the last 12 years, we've been meeting here every week to break down all the action in the wild, weird, and occasionally wonderful world of mixed martial arts. And Ben, when you start an MMA podcast, you do it because you like MMA and you want to talk about the sport and you talk about the fights. And mostly, I think you want it to be fun. Sometimes, however, circumstances intervene, and this is certainly one of those times. Obviously, last week, one of the biggest stars and biggest draws in the history of MMA, Conor McGregor, was found liable for rape by a jury in an Irish court during a civil trial brought by Nikita Hand, the woman I guess we can now legally say he did, in fact, rape back in 2018. And so this is what we're going to talk about this week. This is perhaps the first consequence that McGregor has had to face for a long list of criminal accusations and criminal indiscretions, multiple allegations over the years of sexual assault, multiple instances of physical assault, a whole lot of just otherwise bad and erratic behavior from Conor McGregor. But this is the first time that we can definitively say that he is now an adjudicated rapist, at least by the standards of the civil trial in Ireland. Make no mistake, I guess this is what that means, no matter what anybody tries to tell you. And in my opinion, it's a shame that he won't face criminal charges in this matter, but he will have to pay the victim about €250,000, which is roughly the same in dollars. We talked about this a little bit last week behind the Patreon paywall when it happened, but there have been some updates and news since last week. So we'll be bringing that to you today, especially on an episode of the show that has been otherwise a fairly slow news week. We do have some listener mail we'll get to at the about the middle of the show. And if we have time, some other stuff that's going on with the MMA world. And, you know, we don't relish talking about this stuff, but when one of the biggest stars in the sport commits a heinous, violent act like this, especially when it happens to be part of an overall pattern, or at least what appears to be an overall pattern of criminal behavior, we have to talk about it, or else we'd basically be lying to the people who listen to this show. And if we have ever guaranteed one thing, is that we will try not to lie to the people who listen to this show. So that's what we're going to get into here in a couple minutes. First, I just wanted to mention that the 50% off holiday sale is still going on over there at the Patreon page right now. If you are not a paying subscriber to the CME, you can get 50% off either on a monthly membership or an annual membership if you go to the site and use the code 20E as an Echo 37. You got to do it before December 15th. Maybe you thought about joining the Patreon. Maybe you used to be a member and you wandered away. This is a great time to either check it out or come back into the fold for the first time. But you got to do it before mid-December. And again, this offer is only open to people who are not currently paying subscribers at the CME. Go to patreon.com/co-main event, sign up, and enter the code 20E as in Echo 37. All right, let's talk a little bit about Conor McGregor, Ben. When this news broke last week, I think my initial response was, what took so long? Since we've been hearing stories like this about Conor McGregor for years, and now finally, at long last, it seems like he will suffer some consequences for some of his behavior.
Well, this also was from a case from 2018, 2019?
Yeah, 2018, I believe.
Yeah, so what took so long? Part of the answer might be the slow wheels of justice, the way things take some time to work through court system in Ireland as well as here in the U.S.
Sure. I guess I mean what took so long in terms of this is not the first allegation against Conor McGregor.
What took so long, we could ask in a bigger picture sense, as in, what took so long for Conor McGregor to finally, it seems, face some meaningful consequences for behavior that has been spiraling out of control in full public view for a while now? Because we've seen him sort of get into a little bit of trouble, but not in any way that was seeming like something that would seriously impact his life or career. Even the stuff where he goes and throws the hand truck through the bus window at a UFC event, sends flying glass everywhere. Guys have to be pulled out of their fights that weekend as a result of it. He gets a lawsuit. He gets, arrested in New York. The UFC makes some noise about taking this very seriously. But then, he gets the big fight out of it and they end up using it as a promotional tool. And so you come out of that going like, okay, so nothing bad really happened to him. If anything, he made money off of that deal. And you look around and you start to go, okay, this seems like a guy who is certainly living like he can do absolutely anything he wants. And things that would get other people in major, serious trouble do not really ever seem to affect him. Nothing ever really seems to stick to him until this. And not only, obviously, there's a financial judgment against him that does not amount to much for someone of his wealth. But it seems the public image hit that he is taking, especially in his home country of Ireland, is an example of some meaningful consequences. And the fallout from that seems like it's continuing even today, where we're getting fresh news about the way that that is affecting him. It seems like this is the first thing that really is sticking to him and making people, primarily in Ireland, but you've got to think also elsewhere, especially here in the United States, start to reevaluate how they view Conor McGregor.
Yeah, we found out today the owner of Proper 12 Whiskey announced that it will no longer use Conor McGregor's name or image in and around that beverage. And so while he is not the owner of that, he sold it to Proximo Spirits in 2021, but he continued to promote Proper 12 and Proper 12 Apple Whiskey, which sounds disgusting. Today, the company said it is ending its association with McGregor. He also got pulled out of a video game, Hitman. I didn't know that he was supposed to be in that, but he has been since removed from that. Steffi Hayes over there, the podcaster, former Bloody Elbow writer, I believe she hosts a podcast with our guy John Nash, says Irish liquor distribution giant is removing all Conor McGregor linked alcohol from their inventory. So that's not good. And of course, he's still got an $8 million lawsuit against him that's going to be coming into court next month from former training partner and buddy Artem Lobov. And so, yeah, Conor McGregor has some stuff stacking up against him in the moment. He has personally responded to this guilty verdict in his sexual assault civil case by saying that he will appeal it and that he is innocent, that he believes justice, as he calls it, will prevail at some point. He released this statement, what is it? I believe just yesterday. He said, "People want to hear from me. I needed time. I know I made mistakes. 6 years ago, I should never have responded to her outreaches. I should have shut the party down. I should never have stepped out on the woman I love most in the world. That's all on me. As much as I regret it, everything that happened that night was consensual, and all the witnesses present swore to that under oath. I have instructed my legal team to appeal the decision. I can't go back, and I will move forward. I am beyond grateful to my family, friends, and supporters all over the world who have stayed by my side. That's it. No more. Getting back to the gym. The fight game awaits." And so, a little bit of victim blaming in there, and then a declaration to get back to sports, which feels a little crass to me in the context of the rest of this message.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from his perspective, the message is, here I was wrongly accused, poor me, and let me get back to the thing that you know me for, which we had this conversation on Friday on the Proper after this news first broke of the verdict in this case. And one of the questions we asked is, how does this affect the UFC's plans to get Conor McGregor back in the cage? And does it make Conor McGregor more eager to get back in there and fight because he probably wants to get some other kind of Conor McGregor headline out there that is not this, something that is him actually winning a fight for the first time in a long time. Now, it is interesting, and it's going to continue to be interesting to see what, if anything, the UFC says about this. You're going to have to say something at some point.
Yeah.
It seemed like so far the UFC's response has been they'd want to deny it any oxygen. They don't want to get into this conversation. But when the video game he's in is like, hey, we already paid him, but we still don't want to use him. The whiskey brand that they bought off of him is just like, we recognize that in order to keep selling our stuff, we have to take his name off of this. The whole thing of the whiskey brand, Jed, was marketing based on Conor McGregor's name and popularity. That was all it was.
Yeah.
That's what you bought when you bought the Proper 12 brand, was you bought people knowing this is Conor McGregor's whiskey. It's not good whiskey. I say that as a man who enjoys whiskey. It is not good whiskey. All you bought was the marketing, and now you have to take off that marketing just to continue selling it in Ireland. So he's become sort of a toxic brand in a lot of different ways. And then if you're the UFC, you're going to be in a position of being like, okay, wait, do we want to put together a massive, huge event around Conor McGregor, who other people that they are taking a loss because they don't want to use his name. The other people are willing to pay him and not use what they paid for because he's that toxic. And it's probably going to be a little depressing if we learn that the UFC is just like, hey, we don't give a damn. We are still going to promote a Conor McGregor event. And it's going to be even more depressing to find that, especially in the demographic that the UFC has cultivated as its core fan base, there'll be a lot of people who don't care. You know, and I know that there will be people who are more in favor of Conor McGregor after something like this, just because that's the sick programming in their brain. But it's going to say something if everybody else is rushing to take Conor McGregor's name off their shit, and the UFC is, probably as part of a negotiation for a new broadcast rights deal, going to turn around and be like, don't worry, he's going to be back in 2025, you guys.
Yeah. Well, we have seen the UFC respond in sort of boilerplate fashion to things like this in the past, essentially by saying, we've let the legal system play out and we're going to stay out of that aspect of it. I agree with you that it is going to be a fairly awkward look for them, but they are no strangers to that. And up to this point in the history of the sport, the only things that the UFC has ever really been motivated by are either the ability to make money and or the whims of one somewhat flighty bald gentleman who has now been at the helm for 25 years or so. And he is certainly not afraid to dive into various controversies if he thinks it's going to make them money. We saw that during the pandemic. We've seen that from his unflinching support of Donald Trump, another adjudicated rapist, BT dubs.
Right. And there is another thing. Like, we talked about how that plays with the fan base. It's Dana White's best buddy these days is a guy who's kind of in the exact same position.
Yeah. We've seen them promote fights for Greg Hardy. We've seen them promote fights for people who have done bad things. And as you said, like, do you think this is going to hurt? If the UFC puts on a pay-per-view event with Conor McGregor at the end of 2025, do you think this news is going to hurt the overall buy rate?
I mean, it's hard to say, especially because it's hard to know what the marketing power, what the pay-per-view sales power of Conor McGregor was before this, just given the time that's passed. And one thing we talk about a lot is the churn among MMA fans. We wondered about it when Stipe Miocic came back. How many of the people who are big MMA fans now were even watching the sport last time Conor McGregor won a fight?
Yeah.
So it's hard to know how much of that was just like maybe his star power has dimmed in this sport. Certainly it seems like athletically this sport has moved on and left him behind. If you fight anytime basically in the next year, it's going to come up again. It's going to be an issue whenever you book this guy to fight. Whenever he shows up to fight, you're not going to be able to report on just like, hey, Conor McGregor is coming back without having this. Now, I think a lot of the more pliant aspects of the MMA media will maybe soft sell it a little bit, but it's going to be part of the story. It will be reported everywhere as Conor McGregor's first fight since being found liable of sexual assault.
Yeah.
And the UFC is going to have to come out with some kind of explanation for it. And that will be an interesting thing. Like Dana White's going to have to say something at
Yeah.
some point.
He'll have to say something, I would hope, at the next time he shows up in public, whether it
Right.
be at UFC 310 coming up on December 7th, or whether it is, I don't even know if they're doing the Contender Series right now, but if he shows up to a contender Series press conference, if he shows up to a slappity slap press conference, where, as we all remember, basically the point of the press conferences at both of those events is to have Dana White show up and talk about other stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, very few people show up to the Power Slap and Contender Series press conferences to ask Dana White about Power Slap or the Contender Series. Most people ask him about other stuff, so then they can go and use those quotes to write stories for the rest of the week. One thing that will be awkward, we talked about this behind the Patreon paywall, but I'm going to bring it up again, or has the potential to be awkward, is that the UFC, and Dana White specifically, recently said that one of the reasons it didn't want to do business with Francis Ngannou was that Dana White considered him, quote, a bad guy or not a good guy. And so now here we are with Conor McGregor. If they're going to bring him back out and put on another event with him, I think the question remains, does Dana White think Conor McGregor is a good guy? But we also just saw them produce UFC 309 with Jon Jones in the main event. Jon Jones, obviously no stranger to other various personal indiscretions, up to and including partner abuse. And the UFC clearly has no problem continuing to put on events with him at the top because it knows it's going to make money. So, I mean, if we had to guess, I would say the UFC is probably going to take whatever criticism it is going to get for continuing to put on Conor McGregor fights until Conor McGregor fights become less less profitable, until the juice isn't worth the squeeze, I guess.
Yeah. Or until something really, truly terrible happens that makes it impossible to put on a Conor McGregor fight for one reason or another. I do think there's a difference that comes up in fight sports that you don't see in other sports, which is that when you go to sell a fight with one guy as the main attraction, any Conor McGregor fight he does against anybody, he's the reason it's a big deal is cause Conor McGregor is into it. Like, if you take whoever you're going to have him fight, and Conor McGregor pulls out with a pinky toe at the last minute and they fight somebody else, it's not the same event. We all know that. He is always bringing a certain level of different media attention and stardom and all that kind of stuff to it that makes it a special event. And in fight sports, when you do that, you are very much selling the person and selling our feelings one way or another about the person. When you see this kind of stuff happen in other sports, for one thing, they kind of can't avoid consequences as easily as pro fighters can. You know, we've seen it in other sports where uh, a guy there's going to be a suspension from the league, something in response to that. Whereas here, the UFC is just going to kind of lay low as long as it can, and then hope people forget or don't care. And even when that person comes back, you know, if you come back and you're playing for the Cleveland Browns, for instance, uh, Cleveland Browns fans may not be thrilled about who you are as a person, but if you were to lead them to some victories, that'd be like, okay, fine. And if you don't, then they're going to get even less thrilled with you as a person. With MMA, because there's no team loyalty, really, it's not just like, hey, are we getting W's or not? You are selling us this guy, all of him, everything that we know about him. You can twist that narrative to some extent, and they will. We've always seen that. You know, we'll always try to package the best possible version for sales to the masses, but you got to work with the person. That is how fight sports works. It's such a personality based, star driven business. How do you turn around and sell us this person after that? Do you just pretend this didn't happen, that we don't know this and that it didn't exist? Because normally, if some guy was coming, like Jon Jones is a good example, because remember we watched that Reddit or Roku show, the behind the scenes of the UFC sort of show?
Yeah.
And when they did a little segment on Jon Jones, they very much at least to an extent, leaned into Jon Jones, the problem child of MMA. Jon Jones, the guy who can't get out of his own way, who keeps getting himself in trouble, all this stuff. Remember, we remarked at the time that if we were Jon Jones watching this and we're like, we did a whole montage on the times I've gotten in trouble. Dana White just slapped his wife, and there ain't nothing about that in the Everybody Loves Dana section of the Roku show. That's interesting. But if you were Jon Jones, you watch that thing, you even watch some of the lead up to UFC 309, you're like, okay, so my personal failings are very much a part of the story that you're selling people. Maybe they're not selling the full version of it, they're still soft pedaling some of it, but they're working with it as part of a storyline because they know that we know. I don't feel like you can really do that at all with this. Like, do you have to just ignore it? Do you have to protect? Because otherwise, if Conor McGregor was coming back from an injury, he was coming back from just like fucking up in some other ways. It'd be like Conor McGregor trying to put it all behind him and get back to what he does best. That would be the broad outlines of what you do. How do you do that with this without it feeling just absolutely scummy?
Oh, well, it's going to feel scummy. We can say that without any reservation or hesitation at all. I think what you do if you're the UFC, this is what they will do is you show up, you say, we're going to talk about this one time. You say as little as you possibly can about it, and then you do move on and pretend that it didn't happen. I mean, it's a very, much smaller scale example, but that's basically what they did with Greg Hardy, right? Just, acknowledged that Greg Hardy had some past quote unquote mistakes or whatever they said in the broadcast once or twice, and then just sort of push forward without that being a story. And I think, unfortunately, if you do that with Conor McGregor, a large part of the MMA media is probably going to capitulate to those rules because they'll want to get their Conor McGregor content up there also. And that's probably what you see happen. How the mainstream world reacts to it, I don't totally know. But again, if you have a fan base wherein a large portion views this as either not a problem or explains it away as like a cash grab or whatever other ridiculous arguments they are prepared to make in and around this circumstance, and they still tune in, then the UFC is probably still perfectly willing to do it, would be my guess.
Yeah, okay. As far as the response that like cash grab kind of accusations that we all know inevitably follow from something like this, I think really it's important to kind of step back and appreciate the actual situation that the accuser here, Nikita Hand, was in. And one story that I think highlights this that we saw finally reported after this, that we had heard of but finally saw could be reported after this verdict came down, and we have a version of it on the Uncrowned over on Yahoo Sports, that the big homie Pete Carroll put together, was that she, you know, this thing happened in 2018. She brought this case, and in June, this is from the story, a group of masked men wearing balaclavas and wielding weapons, uh, they broke into her home, stabbed her partner, broke the front windows of her house. She had to move to get away from it and basically kind of go into hiding while this is going on. This seems like likely connected to the McGregor thing. And this is, these people would have us believe a person who is just in it, who's making some shit up for the money.
Yeah.
If you were making some shit up for the money and this shit was happening to you, and then what you got out of it in the end was like 250 grand or so, US, it would absolutely not be worth it. Nobody would do this for that amount of money. Nobody would go through that. I know people want to tell themselves that or something. Again, if that's how it worked, why are there not tons of extremely wealthy and well-known wealthy male pro athletes who are constantly fending off sexual assault allegations? It just doesn't happen. Francis Ngannou, who we were told by Dana White, not a good guy, made millions in boxing, no allegations against him. And to go through all that and to bring this case against somebody like Conor McGregor in Ireland, where he has tremendous wealth and power that could just be brought to bear through legal means, Not to mention that maybe dudes with masks on will break into your house and stab somebody. All of that, to be willing to press forward through all of that is nothing less than tremendous courage.
Yeah.
That's somebody who just wasn't going to let this go, wasn't going to be like, hey, he has more wealth and power than I am, so he does get to do this to me. This is somebody who is just like, no, you don't get to do that shit and get away with it. I'm going to hold you accountable for this, and I'm going to make sure somebody else holds you accountable for this. And you could tell by her reaction to this, it wasn't like she was happy to win the money. She was happy to have a jury of people stand up and say, yes, this happened to you, and it was wrong.
Yeah.
To be willing to do all that and to know what's stacked against you and to still be willing to face that is incredibly brave. It's the kind of thing that a lot of these people who would criticize her or call it a cash grab, whatever, would never have the courage to do. Few people would have the courage to do it in those circumstances. That's something I think let's make sure we don't lose sight of, because that alone, like, that is what shields people with that wealth and power from these consequences a lot. Is just because people know, like, you're going up against Conor McGregor in Ireland trying to tell this story, like, good luck. It's going to be awful for you. And it was a years long ordeal. And to be willing to go through that tells you, like, what this meant to her.
Yeah, for the most part, like the idea that this was some kind of cash grab is completely ludicrous, right? Like the public humiliation and vicious attacks that victims of sexual assault go through when they go public with their stories. You know, even discounting a horrible act of violence where people break into your house and stab your partner, even without that, almost nobody would put themselves through what sexual assault victims go through when they go public, especially not just to get some money. And, the ramifications for bringing sexual assault allegations against anybody, let alone a public figure like Conor McGregor, as you said, are huge. And the justice system so often lets down victims of sexual assault. That's the reason why a lot of sexual assaults don't even get reported, because people know that law enforcement and the court systems very rarely do an effective job with those kind of crimes, let alone take them to like a criminal or civil court case level. And, false accusations, as it turns out, are so rare in the world that when you have somebody like Conor McGregor who has multiple allegations made about him from multiple people, it is statistically impossible that they are all made up. And especially in the case of Nikita Hand, who my understanding was she was enraged or incredibly driven to pursue this civil suit because the Irish authorities decided not to bring criminal charges against Conor McGregor. Had they brought criminal charges and there was some semblance of justice in that realm, she may not have done this. But this is where we wind up. And I agree with you. I think it takes tremendous courage. And I don't see how you could see her reaction standing outside of court, giving her prepared remarks and like breaking down in tears. I don't see how you could look at that person and think that she did this for a cash grab or that she was in some other way lying about what happened in there. I just don't buy it.
Yeah.
If you want to watch a really good explainer about everything that happened here, Luke Thomas interviewed an Irish journalist this week over on his channel, where they kind of lay out the entire timeline of the case and the evidence and what happened with the Irish authorities and all of that. You can go find that on Luke's page. I thought he did a really good job with it, so props to him for that. And now we're going to move on and talk about some actual MMA stuff. I think we'll have some listener mail. Then we'll talk a little bit, I think, about what's going on with Jon Jones. And you know what else? I want to talk a little bit about this PFL Bellator thing that has been in the news this past week, because it doesn't seem great for the company that is trying to position itself as the main rival to the UFC. We will get into that stuff after listener mail. But right now, like we always do about this time, let's do a little bit of listener mail.
Listener mail.
First piece of listener mail this week comes to us from Cursed Diamonds over on Patreon. He writes, "Hey guys, the Soldier of God knocked out a slapper, the Iron Giant, no less. Okay, probably less. At Platinum Mike's private dirty boxing event in front of as many as, quote, several invitees. Do you think Mike hears the WWE talk about how they took wrestling out of the dark, smoky back rooms and figures since wrestling's not there anymore, he's going to try to fill said smoky back rooms with the niche of dirty boxing?" This was kind of insane that this happened last week. And, you know, I might have heard of it a while ago, but I didn't even know Mike Perry was doing a private dirty boxing event until I saw some news about it last week. And maybe that was the idea. Like Mike Perry, bucking the trend of almost every other money-making endeavor in the world, tried to do this thing apparently in front of the smallest audience possible. And I think tried to explain it by saying maybe it was like a dress rehearsal of sorts for, you know, some kind of future event. I know that there was some last-minute shuffling of the card with Yoel Romero's original opponent pulling out. And he finally gets in there, I think, with this slap professional guy and knocks him out. I guess the kind of bizarre scene you might expect from Mike Perry, fight promoter.
First of all, I feel like if Mike Perry starts holding dirty boxing events in smoky back rooms for just like people he sort of knows, or this does seem like a kind of thing you got to know somebody who knows somebody kind of thing. You're not buying these on Ticketmaster. I feel like you show up to that thing, especially, you know, Mike Perry, a known Florida guy for doing these somewhere in one of these states where vaccine requirements are coming down. You're going to get cholera. It's not going to... Eventually, this is going to be regarded as a super spreader kind of event. Where like, hey, some dudes went to Mike Perry's dirty boxing thing. Long story short, now, you know, everybody has typhoid.
Yeah, picked up whooping cough over there at the dirty boxing event.
Though there's something about it that is playing to a same kind of appeal as something like the bare knuckle events, right? Where we see the bare knuckle boxing shows where they're kind of, it's a harkening back to a different era, but also a pushing the boundaries further from, like, we got to find something more extreme than MMA because people are used to MMA now. Putting two guys in a cage and having them fight does not shock people anymore. It's gone mainstream. So what would be shocking enough to get people's interest? Well, what if they're not wearing gloves? Something about that in our brains goes straight to like, oh shit, this is maybe some stuff that feels like it ought to be illegal. And then that becomes normal. That we're selling out stadiums of full arenas with people coming to watch bare knuckle boxing events. So what do you do then? Well, maybe if it feels like some kind of like smoky backroom sort of thing, and Mike Perry is the responsible party.
Please do not refer to Mike Perry as a responsible party ever again.
Maybe if that's there's dirty in the name of the event, maybe then it starts to feel like, okay, yeah, like, do people, some part of them want this feeling like shit they've seen in the movies or in the background of a Street Fighter level or something, where they want to feel like like the same way you'll see these bars pop up that pretend to be speakeasies, and we're like, oh yeah, let's go, I'll get a password or whatever, let's pretend like this shit is still illegal or whatever. Like, some part of us wants to kind of play with that idea, and then Mike Perry comes along and be like, hey, you want to watch a borderline unsanctionable kind of event here? I got you covered.
Yeah, I couldn't decide if this was the best possible thing or the worst possible thing when I heard about it last week. And it's remarkable to me how often I feel that way in and around combat sports. I can't decide if this is great or terrible. And here we got Mike Perry pulling this off. The involvement of Yoel Romero in some ways is totally not surprising, because Yoel Romero certainly seems like the kind of guy that if he found out you were having a backroom fighting event, he would gladly sign up to go do it. But in other ways is surprising just when you consider the profile that this guy has or had in the legitimate MMA world, right? Like, Mike Perry's not getting a Diggstown situation where he's just rustling up, the most broken down people he can find and bringing them out to the dirty boxing event. Yoel Romero's is or was a pretty big deal pretty recently. Still, by the way, looks good getting off the bus. And so to have a guy the caliber of Yoel Romero come in and just knock out a guy who's probably not really even a fighter, it says something. It says something about the event, but I'm not sure I could sit here and tell you what.
You saying this has now forced me to ask, how far are we away from some ambitious promoter giving us a Diggstown type event? I don't think we're that far away. I'm surprised that hasn't happened already. That we getting ourselves into a Diggstown scenario real quick. I'm saying by the end of 2025, we have a real life Diggstown event.
Here's hoping. All right, next question this week comes to us from Puffin on Zooties.
Okay.
Who writes, reflecting on last weekend's UFC main event, I still find myself wondering the what ifs with Peter Yan. What if Yan never threw that illegal knee? How far could his reign have been? Will he ever visit a Turkish hair restoration clinic? And lastly, what becomes of him now? Despite his calls, he's probably not next for the belt and has fought everybody except Mario Batista. Maybe the MMA gods grant us vengeance for Jose Aldo. Thoughts, please.
Man, let Peter Yan show up at the next event with just a luscious, beautiful head of hair and not acknowledge it. Just show up tossing a flowing mane around, and when people ask, Peter, what's up with your hair? He'll be like, oh, I decided to let it grow. What are you looking at? That's what I want.
Show up looking like Elias Theodoro.
Yeah.
Show up looking like Sean O'Malley.
Somebody says something about a Turkish hair restoration clinic, and he's like, what? They have what now? No, I didn't even know that they did that. Huh. Go figure.
We talked about this last week on the Patreon. We theorized that we weren't sure what was going on with Peter Yan being a 2-1 favorite in this fight. We theorized that Davison Figueiredo might show up and do Davison Figueiredo stuff to Peter Yan. That did not happen at all.
Nope.
Peter Yan wins the unanimous decision here. 50-45s across the board, drops Davison Figueiredo at one point, and, pulls off a real nice win here for Peter Yan. What about the notion that he is not going to get that title shot, because he is only 2-3 in his last 5, 3-3 in his last 6, back-to-back wins now over Song Yadong and Davison Figueiredo, because he's out there throwing out the challenge to Merab, and Merab doesn't seem not receptive to the idea, right? Merab might be the kind of guy you could just talk into fighting you at the drop of a hat, right? Whoever is the most recent person to call out Merab is going to be the subject of a poorly thought out and yet somehow higher production value video than it probably deserves, shot at you on his social medias.
You going to talk about his video of him wearing the belt with the chain wrapped around it attached to the car?
Yeah, I loves me some Merab on the social medias, but at the same time, you get this feeling of like, wait, what? What are we doing here with the car and the belt and the chain?
Sit here and call that poorly thought out. If anything, the concept of it is the best part. And imagining them coming up with the concept. Imagining them, those guys sitting around being like, all right, we got to do something. We love to make those videos. Everybody knows we love to make those videos. What do we got? I know. How, like, it has something. It was just the execution of it. Like, this is where you need somebody who knows something about, like, effects or something, like who knows something.
Wait, are you sitting there right now saying Merab needs a special effects guy?
He needs a special effects guy. And not like a CGI kind of guy, but somebody like the kind of guy who can make it so that the chain doesn't break before it's supposed to. Like, that's what you need there, because the idea is good. It has like sort of cartoonish quality of it where, we have watched Wile E. Coyote tie a knot around this giant arrow and shoot it off with a huge crossbow, and we're seeing the rope unravel, and then he's figuring out only too late that it's out the other end is tied around his ankle or something, and he goes flying off. Like we're watching that, and our brains are preparing for what's going to happen when the chain reaches its length and it's tied around his waist. But it's like you can see the chain break in the background before it gets to that point, and so it's execution that is lacking. It is not concept. This is a higher concept and a better concept than 95% of anything any MMA fighter tries to do when making their own videos. Especially, I appreciate the fucking effort. Marab, I will not let anybody disparage this man because he's trying. He is actually trying. He's not just going to get up there, like, make a video while he's driving in the car where he responds to somebody's call out by calling them a bunch of homophobic slurs. Like, let's remember, that's the baseline. That's where we usually start with these things. He was just like, okay, would be cool, you guys. Does anybody have a Nissan Altima and a chain? And then there we go. Like, I appreciate that aspect of it. And you're right that he does seem like the kind of guy, hey, if you say you want to fight Marab, you'll at least hear from him. He's not gonna like completely ignore you. Like he'll have a response for you. And yet, I don't know if turning right around and doing that fight again feels like the best thing you could do with Marab right now. I would think cooler heads around Marab are going to prevail. They're going to be like, listen, you got that title. We're getting points on the pay-per-view now. Let's turn around and get you in a fight that's going to do some big numbers on pay-per-view. And I don't know if that's Peter Yan right now.
I will say this about the Marab video, knowing what I know about other MMA videos. He did succeed in briefly making me very afraid for his personal safety.
Yeah.
He did succeed in that.
Because you're watching that, you're seeing the chain go, and you're doing a very quick math in your head by being like, well, surely what we're not about to watch is Merab Valashvili dragged across the pavement by a chain tied to a mid-sized sedan. That is not going to happen. And if it did happen, they wouldn't post that video. We know that. Intellectually, we know that. But there's a couple seconds when you're watching that chain go out, we're going, what? What are we doing? See, that's the concept is sound. It was the technical execution of it that was lacking just a little bit, but I still appreciate the effort. The other thing about where Peter Yan is at, so the 3-fight losing streak, obviously the first one was fight he was winning against Aljamain. He throws that illegal knee, gets himself disqualified, still iconically stands there with his hand held in victory up high at the end of it. Then he loses, close fight, split decision, Sean O'Malley. Maybe could have gone either way. Then a pretty clear decision victory to Merab. Like, as far as 3-fight losing streaks go, that's kind of the best that it could be, right? Because you have a couple that are losses, but sort of maybe not, and then you lost to the champion. And at the same time, though, you turn around, you got 2 good wins now. You looked really good in this one. However, you looked good in a fight from Macau that took place at like 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning here in the US. Is that a tree fallen in the forest and there's not enough people around to hear it?
I mean, you got Umar Nurmagomedov out there, who is probably your guy. Did you see Ali Abdelaziz reply to the, or we think we know it's Ali Abdelaziz reply to the Merab Dvalishvili Hyundai video, but seems like maybe he forgot to log out of the Umar Nurmagomedov account because Umar Nurmagomedov's account replies, Umar can beat him. That's why he's avoiding him. And then the Umar Nurmagomedov account replies to that with a message that says, sometimes people talk about themselves in the third person.
No way. No, he did not.
I mean, I'm looking at a screenshot of it right now.
Oh my God. How is Chad? this guy is arguably the most powerful manager in this sport. What a damning indictment of the sport itself, but also the state of management, which I want to return to that topic when we get into this Bellator PFL conversation. But oh my God, can you imagine? Like, that guy, he's at the top. He's at the top, working with the brain power of a goldfish. Can't even, not even the first time he's made this mistake. Can't even get this part right. Now, one of the things that Davison Figueiredo brought up when I talked to him, and that might apply here as well, is that he was saying, because I asked him, hey, if you beat Peter Yan, where do you think that leaves you at bantamweight? And he was like, I think that I'll be next in line for the title shot, because the only other guy that they want to have fight for the title is Umar. And he said, Umar isn't going to fight during Ramadan. I'll fight any time of the year.
Yeah.
All I need is 3 months between fights, and I can turn around and do that fight. Now, Ramadan starts like end of February. Are you trying to squeeze that one in before that?
I don't know, man. We're just gonna have to wait and find out what they do, I suppose. Here, hold on real quick. All right, we can go ahead and move on from listener mail and get into some other stuff we want to talk about. That's going to be coming up right after this.
Okay, wait. When we start this next segment, let me reference this Christian Raider thing, because I do have an update on that, and then we get into the PFL Bellator thing.
Okay. All right, Ben, I guess we did want to mention this listener mail email we got from Christian Raider about the horrific knockout by Shi Ming over the weekend. Head kicked her opponent into the shadow realm, says Christian Raider. And during her post-fight speech, she said she has been too merciful in her fights as her opponent is being carried off on a stretcher. Apparently, she is also a doctor who hid her MMA career from her parents. What kind of Sam Raimi original Spider-Man trilogy villain are we dealing with here? Also, Dr. Sleep is a terrifying name for her.
Yeah, man. Okay, first of all, Jed, you ever felt like you were being too merciful to your opponents?
Every week that we do this show.
No, it was kind of like a scary moment there. You watch where, especially giving that speech while Feng's being stretchered off and sort of disappearing in the background there. But I followed up with the UFC and heard that she was released from the hospital that same night after negative scans and 4 hours of observation. She will have a follow-up with the UFC medical team for final clearance. So ended up being okay there. I do think sometimes we've talked about this on UFC broadcasts where somebody can be down, hurt pretty badly for a while, and the broadcast will sometimes go to great lengths to sort of avoid that. And if you're at a UFC event live and you're watching, you'll see it and you'll note like, oh, wow, okay, that one, they kept that out of view for a while. But yeah, when somebody has to leave the cage on a stretcher, I do think we all need to hear how that one turns out.
Yeah.
No matter how it does.
All right, let's talk briefly about what has been going on with the PFL/Bellator in the news this past week. We've had a number of very high profile PFL/Bellator fighters come out and talk about their lack of activity since the merger and their frustrations with the PFL. We had Corey Anderson come out and say that he's frustrated. We had Patchy Mix come out and say that he's frustrated. And then we had Patricio Pitbull come out and jump on his social media and basically just say that this merger has been bad for the sport. Guys aren't fighting enough. He wanted to fight 3 times this year. He only fought once. There have been, scheduling of fights and then rescheduling and cancellations and opponents drop out and everything else. And he says that is not a thing that used to happen with Bellator. And so here you've got the PFL, which I feel like started out with a lot of momentum, or at least gained a lot of momentum in the wake of this Bellator merger, had the big event with Francis Ngannou beating Hernan Ferreira to become the one night only heavyweight super fight mega universal champion or whatever they called it. But we continue to see this kind of refrain from fighters, basically saying, I don't get fights from the PFL. And I feel like if any kind of public relations story is kind of going to cool the PFL or slow them even more in the eyes of not only fans, but also fighters who might think about going over there to test free agency. It's something like this. It just seems like they had, the opportunity to run with the ball a little bit, and maybe they're not capitalizing on it.
Yeah, I've been trying to work on a story about this week, just because when you start to hear this stuff, it's funny how it goes, right? Where you don't really hear that much, and then one or two people will say something publicly, and then a whole lot of other people, maybe they feel safer to say something when they're part of a group saying it. And so I've been trying to kind of reach out and find out what's happening there, what people's experiences have been. And obviously you got that Gegard Mousasi situation where he's going to court over it, and you can understand how it happens, and we've seen it happen before in similar situations where one promotion acquires another one, and then you've got all these existing contracts you got to deal with. The UFC did not love some of the Strikeforce contracts that it got, or even some of the Pride contracts that it got. To the UFC's credit, though, it, from all indications, honored all of those in one way or another. And even though it didn't feel like, okay, we wouldn't have paid this guy what Strikeforce was agreeing to pay him, but you're in a different situation there. The thing is, what I've been hearing as I've tried to reach out to people is they're saying the really frustrating part about it for fighters is not only the lack of activity, but the lack of clear communication that they're getting on it. Because sometimes you have guys where they're told, like, okay, expect to fight at this event at this date, and then it gets called off, and then at least some of the rumors behind why it's called off is we don't have the money to pay for that one. And the fighter's kind of going like, well, what the hell? Why did I prepare for this fight? What is the future for me? Either use me and put me in there, or let me out of my contract so I can try to just make a deal with somebody else. And leaving them hanging there, especially some of these fighters where they're not super young guys. They can't afford to sit around and wait. They're not making any money sitting at on the couch or even being in the gym. They need to fight to get paid. And you might feel like, oh, hey, as a promoter, we're taking our time trying to figure this out during this transition phase. And they're going, I don't have that time
Right.
to wait around for you to get it together. Now, one of the things that ties it into the discussion we were having about Ali Abdelaziz earlier is that, in talking to some people about this, it's notable who you're hearing it from, who you're hearing these complaints from. Because so far I've heard it from a few different fighters, and I heard it from Duke Rufus, who is the coach of Sergio Pettis, who is dealing with this. You don't hear it from managers. And reaching out to managers, there aren't a whole lot of people so far who have been eager to talk about it. And I think we all know why. It's because the management structure, the way it's built in this sport, is that, as our guy John Nash referred to it once, they're basically brokers. They're acting as brokers rather than managers. They want to maintain a good relationship with the promotion. It's a volume business for them. They don't have any one guy who's making so much money that they just need to focus on him as a client. They want to stay in good with the promotion, and so they don't want to be the guy going out there and talking about it. And then you have to ask yourself, are you doing what the manager is supposed to do? Are you advocating for your guys? You're scared to say something because you don't want the promotion to get mad at you. But if the promotion is screwing over your fighters, aren't you supposed to be working for the fighter and not the promotion? Isn't that the person you're supposed to be fighting for? Not like trying to make sure that they can get away with and don't have to face any the bad publicity for screwing over your fighters. Like, you guys should be the ones out there being like, hey, PFL, Bellator need to fight my guy or release him. And you just don't see that very much.
Yeah, that ship sailed on having quality managerial services available a long time ago in MMA. We've been left with the guys that we have, and very few of them seem to do a great job. And you could argue that the few times that people have had competent and effective management in this sport generally doesn't help improve their relations with the various fight promotional companies. And sometimes it results in them either leaving one company or they leave the manager in order to stay in the good graces of the fight promotion. So I kind of hope they get it straightened out over there. Not that I think that PFL is going to compete with or eclipse or even come close to what the UFC is doing. But I mean, it's nice to have them out there as an alternative and a resource for fans and for fighters. So I hope that this is a blip on the radar and not like the beginnings of a death rattle of some kind.
The only other thing I wanted to say before we have to get out of here, I know you're dealing with a time crunch here, is did you see the story we got on Uncrowned today by the big homie Pete C. Carroll? Headline: UFC trying, quote, everything in their power to make Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall happen, says coach.
Yeah, I wanted to bring this up too. This is some quotes, I think, also from Tom Aspinall's dad, right?
Yeah, anytime you get some Andy Aspinall quotes in here,
Gonna use them.
absolutely. And you know what? Again, Tom Aspinall and his dad Andy end up being just a couple of very reasonable seeming dudes, especially for fight sports. Because, Andy Aspinall says he thinks it'll happen. He thinks that they'll probably do it in Las Vegas. He says, quote, I think Jon doesn't know if he wants the fight or not. I think he wants the fight to beat Tom, but he also doesn't want to take that risk because he could lose. He's not afraid to fight anyone, I'm sure, but I don't think he wants to lose his unbeaten record. I'm sure that right now he doesn't know if he's going to do it, and it will depend on the amount of money that they're offering. And now Jon Jones has said that he is already in negotiations with the UFC and that they've been talking it over. Says he won't tell us the details of it, but seems like he went right into talks with them about what it would take to make the fight. Andy Aspinall says he's very clever and his selection and what he's doing is very good. I think his awareness in a fight is tremendous. What he won't be fighting Miocic when he gets in there with Tom. He'll be fighting someone bigger, stronger, faster, younger, and just better. And basically saying, hey, we recognize this as a negotiating strategy. Francis Ngannou said something along the same lines. And especially people who have been on the other end, where Francis Ngannou was like, you know how the UFC will do. They will say he's scared to take this fight. And I don't think he's scared. He's trying to get the best possible deal for himself. And why wouldn't he? Are you encouraged by the thought that Jon Jones came out of this Stipe fight and didn't go home for 3 months and, get himself in trouble before he decided that maybe I'll think about fighting again, but instead is already turned right around and is talking to the UFC about maybe making this one happen?
Yeah, to go from I'm thinking about retiring to now suddenly saying you are back in negotiations is certainly a 180. These quotes from Jon Jones to the schmo about how he is back in negotiations, a little bit of a nothing burger, right? Because he's not really saying anything aside from, hey, man, we're talking. And who knows what that means. But I am encouraged by it, and the fact that he has gone, at least allegedly, so quickly back into talks with the UFC, I think is a good sign. Maybe a good sign that we will get another Jon Jones fight without a years-long break or without, a retirement in between. And I sure hope it's the Tom Aspinall fight, although he doesn't really specifically put his finger on that. But that is the one I think we're all hoping for. And I think that would be the best heavyweight attraction that they could make at the moment, with apologies to Alex Pereira, who I think, makes for a high profile, but arguably less interesting fight for Jon Jones. And man, the Aspinalls are always just going to say what everybody's thinking, right? Like those quotes from Tom Aspinall's dad. He just, he's right. He just said it. He said it all when he said it, I guess you could say, because just reasonable, measured, laying out the facts of what probably is actually going on. And anytime you get that in MMA, you got to appreciate it.
Yeah,
right?
You do.
Anytime you get a level-headed and even-handed person who's just going to come out and tell you what's happening, we got to savor that, I think.
Yeah, because you don't know when you'll get it again.
Much like a Jon Jones fight, you don't know when you'll get it again. All right, that's going to do it for this week's Co-Main Event podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We appreciate the support. We're going to be over on the Patreon page for at least tomorrow before the Thanksgiving holiday, and then after we all get back, we will pick it up again for regular weeks of Patreon content. Don't forget to get in with the 50% off either on a monthly membership, or hell, you can get 50% off on a whole year if you sign up for an annual membership. Just go over to patreon.com/co-main event and sign up using the promo code 20E37. As for right now, we're done. We're through. We're out. All right. I think I paused that video correctly, so it stops and then starts again. I think. Who knows? Oh, we're not going to do this. Are you, GarageBand? Man, I got the little colored wheel spinning. That's usually a bad sign.
Video's still going, by the way.
Well, you got to be able to edit these things, man.